At my father's funeral, he quietly left me an old savings passbook. My daughter saw it and threw it straight into the trash. This should have been buried with him. I said nothing, but I still took that passbook to the bank. Within seconds, the manager's face went pale. He looked at me and said, "Call the police. And don't leave. Welcome and thank you for staying with this story." Before we go any further, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, your city or country. I read every single one. Also, a quick note. This story contains fictionalized elements added for educational and storytelling purposes. Any similarity to real people or events is coincidental, but the lesson behind it is very real. My name is James Mitchell. I'm 58 years old, and until that October morning, I thought the most interesting thing happening in my life was closing a commercial real estate deal, or maybe finally fixing the broken fence on my property that had been sagging for 3 long years. I work as an investment consultant in Austin, Texas, a good job, stable income, the kind of life most people would call successful without any hesitation. My office overlooks Lady Bird Lake from the 32nd floor of a downtown building. My car is paid off. My house in the Westlake Hills neighborhood is exactly the kind of place people dream about when they think about retirement, complete with a pool and a guest house. But success, I've learned the hard way over the years, can be the best disguise a person ever wears. I grew up thinking my father, Edward Mitchell, was nothing more than a quiet accountant. He spent 40 years tracking numbers, balancing spreadsheets, finding the tiny mistakes that other people missed completely. After he retired at 65, he moved to a small farm about 2 hours outside Austin, the kind of place with a wraparound porch and fields that seemed to stretch forever toward the horizon, endless and peaceful. Everyone who knew him assumed he had nothing much, just an old man living a simple, quiet life in the Texas countryside, waiting for time to eventually catch up with him. That's what I thought too. That's what my daughter Vivian believed as well. But 2 weeks before that morning at the bank, everything shifted on its axis in ways I never could have imagined. That morning at the bank, I only knew that something about the old passbook I'd discovered had absolutely terrified a man whose entire job is to stay calm under pressure, to maintain composure no matter what walks through his doors. I sat across from Adrian Blackwood in his private office at First Regional Savings, the passbook spread on his desk between us like evidence at a crime scene. Adrian's face had gone pale the moment he saw it. The moment he understood I actually held the proof my father Edward had been protecting for 15 years. I don't understand. I heard myself say, my voice sounding strange and distant in my own ears. It's just an old account. My father's account from years ago, probably worthless by now. Adrian looked at me like I'd just handed him a live grenade instead of a piece of paper. His eyes went wider than I'd ever seen them in all the years I'd done business with this bank. He reached for a file on his desk, his fingers shaking visibly, and I could see sweat forming on his forehead despite the air conditioning running at full blast. "Mr. Mitchell," he said slowly, each word deliberate and careful, measured like a judge delivering a sentence, "that passbook shouldn't exist." I still didn't understand what he meant. Not then. Not in that moment. I thought maybe it was some banking rule I didn't know about, some regulation about old accounts or something technical that was beyond my understanding. But the look on his face told me it was something much bigger than that, something that had genuinely frightened him. Adrian opened the file and pulled out a power of attorney form. The signature at the bottom bore my father's name. But even I could see the discrepancies. The pressure variations were wrong. The strokes, too, rushed, the whole thing bearing the marks of forgery. In 2015, Adrian began, his voice barely above a whisper. Someone attempted to access this account using this document. We caught it immediately. The signature didn't match our authenticated samples. "Who?" I asked, though I was beginning to understand. "Your daughter, Mr. Mitchell. With your son-in-law Vincent's involvement based on the document analysis. They tried to withdraw $2.1 million. Nearly the entire balance at that time." The room seemed to tilt. I gripped the edge of the desk. Adrian continued explaining how my father had discovered the fraud attempt, how he'd asked Adrian to keep it quiet, how Edward had spent the next 10 years monitoring the account, documenting everything, waiting for the right moment to act, how my father had accumulated over $2.8 million in this hidden account money he'd been protecting from his own daughter and her husband. "And your father knew what Vivian and Vincent were doing," Adrian said quietly. "He documented it all. He wanted evidence. He wanted to be absolutely certain before taking action. And Mr. Mitchell." Adrian leaned forward, his voice dropping even lower. "The attempted theft in 2015 wasn't the beginning. Your father showed me documentation, suggesting this has been happening for much longer. Years, possibly decades." I sat in silence, trying to process what Adrian was telling me. My daughter Vivian and her husband Vincent hadn't just made a financial mistake. They'd committed systematic fraud. They'd tried to steal from my father, and my father had spent years documenting their crimes, waiting, preparing. "Why didn't he go to the police?" I demanded. "He said he needed to understand why they were doing this first." Adrian replied, "He said he wanted to protect your daughter. He believed she was being manipulated by your son-in-law. He wanted to gather enough evidence that the truth would be undeniable." And then, Adrian paused, choosing his words carefully. "And then he died. I finished for him." "Yes," Adrian said. "And he left this for you to find. This passbook. This evidence. He left you a choice, Mr. Mitchell. Justice or mercy. Truth or family loyalty. He left you everything you need to decide what happens next." I looked down at the passbook at the account number 774122289, at the balance that represented 15 years of my father's vigilance, 15 years of documentation, 15 years of waiting for someone for me to understand what he'd discovered. And then it hit me, whatever was in that passbook, whatever my father had hidden away in that chessbook, all those years, it was important. It was significant. It was the reason he'd told me in his final weeks to find the chessbook. "Only you, James," he'd whispered. "Only you will understand." But now I understood, and understanding meant I could never go back to the life I'd had before. Understanding meant everything would change. After the church service that Friday afternoon, the family gathered at the farmhouse for a quiet reception. It was the same wraparound porch where my father had taught me to play chess 50 years earlier. October in the hill country. The Texas heat had finally broken, leaving behind those perfect autumn days when the sky turns a particular shade of blue that only happens once a year. My father would have appreciated the weather. He always said that nature has a way of being respectful at moments that matter. I'd arrived early that morning before anyone else showed up. I needed time alone in his study, sitting in the leather chair where he'd spent so many hours reading and thinking. The air still smelled like him old leather pipe tobacco that he'd quit 20 years ago, but somehow never completely left the room. I kept thinking about that final conversation, the one where he'd grabbed my hand with surprising strength and whispered about the chessbook. His words had seemed almost confused at the time, cryptic. But now I understood. He'd already been planning something. By noon, the family had arrived. Vivian came with Vincent Bradford. Vincent was the type of man who checks his watch at funerals, mentally calculating profit margins while people are grieving. Expensive suit country club tan that practiced smile investment advisors perfect over the years. He'd been married to my daughter for 12 years now, and I still couldn't figure out what she saw in him. But that wasn't my concern, or so I'd always told myself. Looking back, I should have paid more attention. My daughter Vivian looked composed that day. She stood at the front of the gathering space, accepting condolences with practiced grace, that perfect blend of sadness and control. She'd inherited that from her mother. Vivian had always needed to be in control, needed to manage everything around her like a business acquisition. She handled her father's estate paperwork with clinical precision, asking practical questions about taxes and assets rather than memories. But there was something else I noticed now that I hadn't before. The way she looked to Vincent before answering certain questions. The way she waited for his subtle nod before making decisions about her father's belongings. It was small, barely perceptible to anyone who wasn't looking for it. But once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. The service itself was brief. The minister spoke about Edward Mitchell's life 40 years as an accountant, his love of reading, his quiet nature. People shared memories, how he'd helped them with tax returns, how he'd always been honest. I sat there listening, thinking that nobody really knew him. They knew the surface version, the accountant, the reliable man, the widower. They didn't know the strategic mind underneath. The man who could see 3 moves ahead in chess, and apparently in life as well. After the service, people lingered at the farmhouse eating sandwiches and making small talk. That's when I noticed something. I was standing near his study when I saw Vivian heading toward the bookshelves on the far wall. She was holding something that hollowed-out chess book, the one I'd only discovered inside his study that same morning. My breath caught. I had no idea how she'd found it, but she was holding it like it was worthless. She stopped near Vincent and showed him the book. I couldn't hear what she said, but I saw his eyes light up just for a moment, just long enough for me to catch it. Then his expression settled back into that practiced ease. He touched her arm, said something low that I couldn't quite hear. Vivian nodded, and something passed between them. An understanding, a confirmation. Vincent had been waiting for that book. "This is just old junk," Vivian said loudly enough for others to hear. "Useless books taking up space. Dad's study is full of this stuff." She didn't sound sentimental. She sounded irritated, like someone trying to eliminate a problem before it could become something worse. But now I understood. It wasn't Vivian eliminating the problem. It was Vincent. And Vivian was his instrument. I watched as Vincent leaned in again, spoke low. This time I caught more, already handled that, and nothing to worry about. His hand stayed on her arm, not protective but possessive. Controlling. The kind of touch that says, "Do what I've already decided you'll do." I thought about the way he'd always asked questions about her father's finances, her father's investments, her father's plans. Questions that seemed innocent at the time. Questions that seemed like normal conversation between a father-in-law and a son-in-law. But Vincent never asked innocent questions. She walked directly to the kitchen trash can and dropped the book inside. Not gently. She dropped it like it was contaminated, like it was evidence that needed to disappear. "Cleaning out the old man's clutter," she said to no one in particular. "These things should have been thrown out years ago." Vincent watched from across the room, his expression neutral. But his eyes were satisfied. Like a man who'd just completed a carefully orchestrated plan. Like a man who'd gotten exactly what he expected from his wife. I felt something crystallize inside me in that moment. It wasn't just anger. It was understanding mixed with something darker. This wasn't about Vivian trying to steal from her grandfather. This was about Vincent using my daughter as a tool in whatever game he'd been playing for the past 12 years. And Vivian, my daughter, didn't even realize she was being played. Vivian and Vincent left within the hour, both anxious to get back to Austin, back to their lives. Vincent had a dinner meeting he couldn't miss. Vivian had business calls. That was typical of them. Show up, perform the necessary rituals, leave before the sun sets. But as I watched them drive away, I understood something my father must have understood long ago. Vincent Bradford had married my daughter with a purpose, and whatever plan he'd set in motion 12 years ago, he was still executing it. The chessbook had been part of that plan, and now it was gone, or so he thought. I drove back to Austin in the dark, my mind spinning. I couldn't stop thinking about that moment, the coordination between them, the control in Vincent's touch, the way Vivian had moved exactly as he'd directed her. I lay awake most of that night, surrounded by questions I couldn't answer. But one thing was becoming clear: my father had seen through Vincent Bradford long before I ever did. And he'd made his choice about who to trust accordingly. It wasn't Vivian, it was me. The next morning before dawn, I made the drive back to the farmhouse alone. The chess book was still in the trash exactly where Vivian had thrown it, exactly where Vincent had wanted it to be. I couldn't sleep that night, not a single minute of it. I lay awake in my bed, back in Austin, staring at the ceiling in the darkness, listening to the sound of crickets outside the window and the old house settling around me. My father's words kept echoing in my head, words he'd spoken just weeks before he died, when his voice was already becoming thin and distant. The chess book. He'd whispered, his weathered hand gripping mine with surprising strength. Only you understand, James. Only you. I thought he was confused at the time that his mind was drifting. But now I understood. He hadn't been confused at all. He'd been deliberate. He'd been planning, and whatever he'd left for me, whatever was inside that hollowed-out chess book, was important enough to haunt me through the entire night. Around 4 a.m, I gave up on sleep. I got out of bed, got dressed quietly, so as not to wake anyone else still in the house, and I decided to do something I hadn't done since I was a teenager. I drove back to the farmhouse at dawn without telling anyone where I was going. The roads were empty at that hour, just me and the occasional 18-wheeler heading down Highway 71. The sky was still dark, but there was that pre-dawn quality to the air, that sense that something important was about to happen. I arrived at the farmhouse just as the first light was breaking over the fields to the east. Everything looked different in the darkness, more mysterious, somehow more significant. The wraparound porch where my father had taught me chess all those years ago seemed smaller than I remembered it. The fields stretched out beyond the house like they were waiting for something. The kitchen trash can was exactly where it had been the day before, untouched, exactly as Vivian had left it when she threw the chess book away. No one else had come looking for it. I felt a little foolish, a middle-aged man in his 50s, digging through garbage at 5 a.m, but I couldn't stop myself. I pulled out the bag, set it carefully on the kitchen floor, and started looking through it methodically. Coffee grounds, napkins from the funeral reception, some old newspapers, a broken pen, the kind of debris that accumulates in a house over just a few days. But then near the bottom, my fingers touched something familiar, the worn leather binding of a book. The chess book. I pulled it out and wiped it clean with my sleeve. It was exactly as I remembered it. Old yellowed pages, a worn leather cover with the title embossed in faded gold letters, Strategic Endgames, a Master's Guide. My father and I had discussed the positions in this book 100 times over the years, sitting on that porch with glasses of iced tea in our hands, and the Texas heat settling around us like a blanket. But now, as I held it in my hands, something felt different about the book's weight. It felt wrong somehow, not quite balanced the way it should have been if it was just paper and binding. I opened it carefully, my heart already starting to beat faster, and that's when I felt it. The pages inside the book had been cut away. Someone had carefully, methodically hollowed out the interior of this book, creating a secret compartment. It was done professionally, precisely the kind of work my father would have done if he'd decided to hide something important. And inside that compartment was a small leather passbook, the kind you don't see anymore in the digital age. The cover was faded and worn, made to look like something from decades past. But when I opened it and looked at the account number printed inside, something didn't add up. The format was wrong, too many digits. The structure too modern for something that appeared to be from the 1960s. This wasn't an old account. This was something that had been made to look old. My hands started shaking. Tucked into the spine of the passbook was a small piece of paper folded into a tiny square and worn at the edges. The handwriting was my father's, that precise, careful penmanship that he'd maintained throughout his entire life as an accountant. 4 decades of tracking numbers had given him handwriting that looked like calligraphy. I unfolded it slowly. Account number 774122289. It read, "They don't know about this one. Ask for the full history. Trust no one in the family. Only you, James, only you. The paper trembled in my hands. I read it 3 times, 4 times, my brain struggling to process what those words meant. They don't know. Meaning my daughter. Meaning my son-in-law. My father had hidden something from his own family. He'd hidden it in a chess book, the same chess book where we'd spent hours together discussing strategy and patience and how to think several moves ahead. He'd hidden it specifically for me. I looked at the account number again, 774122289. It meant nothing to me at that moment. Just numbers. Just a sequence of digits that my father wanted me to find. But in that kitchen at 5 in the morning with the sun starting to break over the Texas fields, I understood one thing with absolute certainty. My father hadn't been confused at the end of his life. He hadn't been rambling about chess books because his mind was failing. He'd been leaving me a message, a puzzle, a secret, and whatever was in account. Number 774122289. My father believed it was important enough to hide from everyone except me. The morning light was just breaking through the farmhouse windows when my phone rang. It was too early for a casual call. I was in my father's study, the passbook still in my hands, when Vivian's name appeared on the screen. I almost didn't answer. James. Her voice came through tight, stressed. We just wanted to make sure you're not going through Dad's personal papers without checking with us first. There was something wrong with the way she said it. The words were measured careful, but underneath them was something raw, something close to panic. I'm just straightening things up. I lied. Nothing important. Still, Vivian said quickly, we'd prefer if you didn't go through his desk or his study without letting us know. Some of that stuff is private, family business. It needs to be handled properly. She was talking too fast. Vivian never talked fast. Vivian was always controlled, always measured. But right now, she sounded like someone who'd been running. I understand, I said. I mean it, James. There was an edge in her voice now. Dad kept a lot of confidential documents, financial things, personal things. They should stay private. I thought about the passbook. I thought about the note inside trust, no one in the family. Only you, James. I'll be careful, I said. She hung up. Exactly 1 hour later, Vincent called. Hey, James. Look, my wife's a little concerned about some things at the farmhouse. His voice was smooth, practiced. The voice of a man who sold things for a living. No, she's worried that you might be getting into Edward's personal stuff without checking with us first. Your wife already called me, I said. Right. Well, she wanted to make sure the message got through. Vincent's tone stayed even, but I could hear the calculation underneath it. We just think everything should be handled properly, legally, with everyone on the same page, I know, I said. Good man, just don't go digging too deep in those old files, okay? Some things are better left alone. He hung up. I sat there in the silence of my father's study holding the passbook, and I understood something I hadn't understood before. This wasn't about protecting the estate. This wasn't about following proper procedures. This was about fear. Vivian was afraid, and I was beginning to understand why. 3 weeks earlier, though, I didn't know this until much later, Vivian had been cleaning out a closet at her house when she found an old envelope. Inside was a bank statement, a statement she hadn't seen in a decade, a statement for an account she thought had been closed years ago. The account still existed. The account had been growing. The balance was $2,847,300. I didn't know this that morning. But Vivian did. And the knowledge had been eating at her for 3 weeks straight. She'd called Vincent immediately. They'd talked in hushed tones in the privacy of their bedroom in the car on the way to work. What did this mean? How was the account still active? How much money was actually there? What if Edward had changed his will? What if someone else knew about it? What if James found out? The panic had started small, a nagging worry, a what-if scenario. But as the days passed, it had grown. By the time my father died, just days after Vivian found that statement, the panic had become something close to obsession. They had to find that account. They had to find any evidence of it. They had to make sure no one else knew it existed. Which is why when they learned that James was going to the farmhouse to go through their father's things, the fear had crystallized into action. Which is why they'd called me. Which is why Vivian's voice had been shaking when she told me not to dig through the papers. But I didn't know any of this yet. All I knew was that something had changed. Something had shifted between the moment when Vivian had thrown the chess book into the trash and this moment when she was calling me in a panic. I looked down at the passbook in my hands. The account number was 774122289. The balance was listed as $2,875,600. The account had been opened in 2010 and had never had a single withdrawal. 15 years of growth, 15 years of accumulation, 15 years of my father building something in secret, protecting it, hiding it away from his daughter and her husband. I understood now why my father had told me about the chess book. I understood why he'd been so specific. Only you, James. Only you. He'd known something was wrong in his family. He'd seen it. He'd watched it. And he'd prepared accordingly. I put the passbook back inside the hollowed-out chess book and closed the cover carefully. Then I placed it back on the shelf where I'd found it, not where my father had hidden it, but where Vivian had thrown it away. But this time I moved it. I placed it somewhere she wouldn't think to look, somewhere safe. Because now I understood something crucial. My father hadn't just hidden money from his daughter. He'd hidden it for a reason. He'd hidden it because he'd known exactly what Vivian and Vincent would do if they discovered it existed. And he'd trusted me to make sure they never got their hands on it. The phone sat silent in my pocket for the rest of the morning. I didn't answer any more calls. I didn't respond to any more messages. Instead, I sat in my father's study, and I thought about the 20 years since my mother died. I thought about how my daughter had changed during those years. I thought about the man she'd married and the influence he'd had on her. I thought about the subtle way he'd positioned himself, the way he'd slowly isolated her, the way he'd made her believe that his ambitions were her own. I thought about what my father must have seen, what he must have understood, what he must have felt watching his only grandchild become a stranger. And I thought about the choice my father had made to trust me instead. The chess book was secure now. The passbook was safe. The account number was burned into my memory. Whatever Vivian and Vincent were planning, whatever they were afraid, I was going to find it first. And I was going to find it before they had the chance to destroy it. The next morning I didn't wait for the sun to fully rise. I got up before dawn, made a cup of coffee that I didn't really drink, and loaded the passbook carefully into my bag, along with my driver's license and my father's death certificate. I told myself I needed to verify the account, to confirm that what I'd found was real and not some elaborate figment of a sleep-deprived imagination. But deep down I knew I was running from something. I was running from the questions that had kept me awake all night, from the sound of Vivian's voice on the phone, from the weight of Vincent's words hanging in the air between us. The drive to Millbrook took exactly 2 hours, following Highway 71 through the Texas Hill Country, as it emerged from darkness into pale gray light. I'd made this drive dozens of times over the years to visit my father, but this time it felt different. The landscape was the same: rolling hills, scattered oak trees, ranches stretching out toward the horizon, but everything seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I kept thinking about the passbook in my bag. I kept thinking about account number 774122289. I kept thinking about my father's voice telling me, "Only you, James. Only you." Millbrook is the kind of small Texas town that time seems to have forgotten. Population around 3,000. One traffic light. A main street with a diner that probably hasn't changed much since the 1970s. The kind of place where everybody knows everybody's business, which is probably why my father chose a bank here instead of one in Austin. Less attention. Less scrutiny. First Regional Savings sat on the corner of Main and Third, a brick building that had probably been built sometime in the 1960s. The windows were clean, but the paint was faded, and there was something about the place that felt stable and reassuring, the kind of bank where your money would be safe, where nobody would ask too many questions, where a man could quietly set up an account and leave it alone for 15 years without anyone raising an eyebrow. I walked in at 9:15 in the morning. The bank was nearly empty, just an elderly couple at one desk, and a young woman at the teller counter who looked like she'd probably worked there for maybe a year, 2 at most. She had that eager-to-please energy that comes from not quite knowing what you're doing yet. I approached her window and slid the passbook across the counter. "I'd like to inquire about this account," I said, keeping my voice steady and professional. "I'm the son of the account holder, Edward Mitchell. He recently passed away." The young teller took the passbook and examined it with polite curiosity. She typed the account number into her computer 774122289 and waited for the system to respond. I watched her face change. The color drained out of her cheeks, like someone had pulled a plug somewhere deep inside. Her eyes went wide. "One moment, sir," she said quietly, and she stood up from her desk with movements that seemed to happen in slow motion. "I need to get my manager." She disappeared into the back office, and I stood there at the counter, holding my breath, wondering what she'd seen on that screen that had frightened her so badly. 2 minutes passed. 3. I could hear muffled voices from the back, hers, calm and controlled, despite her obvious shock, and another man's voice, deeper and more authoritative. Then a man emerged from the back office. He was probably in his 50s with gray hair and the kind of face that suggested he'd spent his entire career trying to project confidence and stability. He extended his hand across the counter. "I'm Adrian Blackwood, the regional manager," he said, his voice careful and measured. "Why don't we step into my office? We need to discuss your father's account." His office was small but well-appointed, with mahogany furniture and diplomas on the walls from universities I'd never heard of. Adrian sat behind his desk and opened a file on his computer. He was quiet for a long moment, reading through something on the screen, and I could see the muscles in his jaw tightening with each passing second. "Your father opened this account in 2010. Adrian said finally, his words coming out slowly, like he was choosing each one with extreme care. "The initial deposit was $1 million. Since then, the account has earned interest through various investments we manage here at the bank. The current balance," he paused. He actually paused like he was steeling himself for what he was about to say. "The current balance is $2,875,600, he said. Exactly $2,875,600. The numbers didn't make sense at first. My brain couldn't process them. $2.8 million. My father, the quiet accountant, who drove a 10-year-old truck and lived in a modest farmhouse, had been sitting on nearly $3 million the entire time. 15 years. The account had been open for 15 years, and it had just been sitting there untouched, growing quietly through compound interest and careful management. Your father has never made a withdrawal." Adrian continued, his eyes meeting mine with something that looked like concern. "Not once in all these years. The account has simply been accumulating interest. We've sent statements to his address twice a year, but he never responded to any of our communications." I felt the room starting to spin slightly. I gripped the armrest of the chair to steady myself. "Is there a problem?" I asked, though I wasn't sure what kind of problem could be bigger than this. Adrian leaned back in his chair. "Mr. Mitchell, in all my years working at this bank, I've never seen anything quite like this. Your father set this account up very carefully, very deliberately. He made it clear that nobody else was to have access to it. And then, he just left it alone. For 15 years. Why are you telling me this?" I asked. If he set it up specifically to keep it private, because, Adrian interrupted, there's something else you need to know. Something that happened in 2015. He turned his computer monitor around so I could see the screen. On it was a record of an attempted transaction, a withdrawal attempt, initiated by someone with power of attorney over the account. Someone named Vivian Mitchell. The room went quiet. The air seemed to stop moving. Everything I'd suspected, everything I'd been afraid of, suddenly crystallized into absolute, undeniable truth. My daughter had tried to steal from my father, and she'd been planning to do it for a very long time. After Adrian finished explaining the 2015 attempt and the account history, he pulled out another folder. This one was thicker, filled with photographs and technical reports. This is what really sealed the case, Adrian said. This is what made it impossible for your daughter and her husband to deny anything. He laid out several documents on the desk. They were photographs of signatures side-by-side comparisons. We hired a forensic handwriting expert after we flagged the fraudulent power of attorney in 2015, Adrian explained. She's one of the best in the country. Her analysis was thorough and detailed. Adrian pointed to the first comparison. This is an authenticated signature from your father, Edward, taken from his original account opening documents in 2010, Adrian said. And this is the signature on the forged power of attorney from 2015. I studied the two signatures. Even to my untrained eye, the differences were obvious. The first signature was controlled precise, each letter formed with deliberation. The second was rushed. The pressure inconsistent, the baseline tilted. The expert identified 17 points of dissimilarity. Adrian continued. 17 different ways in which the forged signature deviated from the authentic one. The pressure variations alone were conclusive. Your father, Edward, always applied consistent pressure. The forged signature shows erratic pressure, heavy in some places, light in others. That's a classic sign of tracing. Adrian pulled out the expert's written report. It was dense with technical language and photographic evidence. The expert also found evidence of pen lifts, Adrian said, pointing to specific areas. Your father, Edward, rarely lifted his pen during his signature. His signature flows continuously, but in the forged version, there are visible hesitations. Places where the forger lifted the pen, repositioned, and continued. That's another red flag. There's more, Adrian said. He pulled out photographs of other forged documents. Over the years, we've documented 217 forged documents that passed through various accounts. Adrian explained. We have bank transfer authorizations, invoice approvals, withdrawal requests, all bearing forged signatures, some purporting to be from your father, some from your daughter herself. Adrian showed me a series of these documents, each with a signature highlighted. The forensic expert analyzed all 217 documents. Adrian continued. And she found a consistent pattern. The forged signatures, whether purporting to be from your father or from your daughter, all showed the same characteristics, the same hesitations, the same pressure inconsistencies, the same pen lifts. What does that tell you? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. It tells us that one person was responsible for most of the forgeries, Adrian said. Your son-in-law, Vincent Bradford. The handwriting expert concluded with 98% certainty that Vincent was the forger. The remaining signatures, the ones purporting to be from your daughter, showed different characteristics, different hesitations, different pressure patterns, which suggests your daughter may have forged some documents herself, or that Vincent taught her how to do it. Adrian pulled out one more document, a summary letter from the handwriting expert. The expert concluded that the forged signatures constituted a series of deliberate, intentional acts of fraud. Adrian read aloud. She stated that the level of sophistication shown in attempting to replicate your father's signature indicated planning and premeditation. This wasn't a spontaneous crime. This was calculated. She also noted that the documents themselves, the invoices, the bank transfers, the power of attorney papers, were all professionally formatted. They looked legitimate. That required knowledge of how banks process documents, knowledge of what legitimate paperwork looks like. Your son-in-law has that knowledge. Adrian closed the report. The handwriting evidence combined with the bank records and the money trails creates an irrefutable case, Adrian said. Your daughter and her husband didn't just steal money. They carefully forged documents to make it look legitimate. They created fake companies. They laundered the money through shell accounts. This wasn't theft. This was systematic financial crime. And the evidence is documented in every single one of those 217 documents, Adrian continued. Each one is a separate count of fraud. Each one shows the same pattern, the same forgers, the same methodology. The prosecutor will present this evidence at trial, Adrian said. And I don't see how your daughter or her husband can defend themselves against it. The handwriting expert's testimony alone would be enough to convince a jury. Combined with the bank records and the money trails, it's overwhelming. I sat back in my chair absorbing what Adrian had told me. The evidence wasn't just substantial, it was meticulous. My father had collected not just financial records, but physical proof of the forgeries themselves. He'd ensured that there was no way my daughter and her husband could claim ignorance or accident. This was proof of premeditation, proof of planning, proof of a deliberate conspiracy to defraud. And it was all documented, analyzed, and ready for trial. Adrian had handed me a business card before I left the bank. Martin Ashford, attorney at law. The card was old, the kind that suggested Martin didn't believe in updating his professional materials very often. On the back, Adrian had written a note in blue ink. He's been waiting for your call. Your father made sure of it. I called Martin from my car as I was driving back toward Austin. Mr. Mitchell. His voice was calm, measured. The voice of a man who'd been expecting the call. I was wondering when you'd contact me. Your father told me you would eventually. Need to meet with you, I said. Today, if possible. Come to my office, Martin said. I'll be waiting. His office was exactly what I expected, small, old, and filled with the kind of chaos that suggested Martin had been practicing law in the same location for at least 30 years. The building was tucked between a dry cleaner and an insurance office, the kind of place you'd walk past 100 times without noticing. There was no flashy sign, no indication that anything important happened here. But everything important had happened here. Martin Ashford was in his 70s, I'd guess. Gray hair, wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of tan that comes from actually spending time outside rather than in an office. He stood when I came in, extending his hand. His grip was firm but not aggressive. The grip of a man who had nothing left to prove. James, he said simply. You look like your father. I see that now. Around the eyes. You knew him well, I said. It wasn't a question. Up for 40 years, Martin confirmed. Since before you were born. We met in law school, believe it or not. Edward was studying accounting, I was studying law. We sat next to each other in a political science elective. Started talking about chess one day during a break, never stopped. He gestured for me to sit, and I took the chair across from his cluttered desk. Your father came to me about 15 years ago, Martin continued. He said he needed to set up some accounts, keep certain things private. He asked me to help him with the legal side of things, making sure everything was bulletproof, making sure no one could touch it without authorization. 15 years. That would be 2010, the year the account had been opened. I did what he asked, Martin said. I set up structures. I made sure everything was airtight. And then your father did something unusual. He asked me to hold something for him, a package, instructions. And he told me that if anything ever happened to him, I was to give those materials to you and you alone. Martin reached over to a filing cabinet beside his desk and pulled out a thick manila folder. It was even heavier than the one Adrian had shown me at the bank. This folder looked like it had been accumulating weight for years. In 2020, Martin said, opening the folder carefully, "Your father came to me and updated everything. He added more documents, more evidence, more context. He told me he'd been watching something, waiting for it to develop. And he wanted to make sure that when the time came, you would understand." Martin pulled out the first set of documents. They were photocopies of bank statements, account transfers, records of transactions. But these weren't from the account at First Regional Savings. These were from other banks, other accounts. "Your daughter," Martin said carefully, "has been transferring money out of your father's accounts for a very long time. Not just the 2015 attempt your banker told you about. That was just one incident. But there have been others. Earlier attempts. Different accounts. Different banks." He laid out a timeline. Dates and amounts. 2011, 2012, 2013. Small withdrawals at first, then larger ones. Then attempts with forged documents. Then attempts with false power of attorney letters. "Your father documented everything," Martin continued. "He kept records. He photographed documents. He collected evidence. Why? Because he understood what was happening. He understood that his daughter had gotten involved with someone who was using her. Someone who was systematically attempting to steal from him, Vincent." In 2015, Martin said, pulling out another set of documents, there was a particularly aggressive attempt. Your daughter tried to withdraw $2.1 million using a forged power of attorney. The bank caught it. The attempt failed. But your father understood something important at that moment. "What?" I asked. "That his daughter didn't know the attempt had failed," Martin said. "Or that if she did know, someone had told her a very different story. Your father believed that your daughter was being manipulated, used, that she didn't fully understand what she was participating in." He pulled out more documents, forged signatures, fake notarizations, fraudulent power of attorney documents, but also, and this was the part that made my chest tighten, letters. Personal letters from Edward to himself, documenting what he'd observed, what he'd suspected, what he feared. "My daughter doesn't recognize what's happening to her," one letter read. "The man she married has slowly isolated her from reality. He's convinced her that theft is investment strategy, that fraud is family business. I don't know how to reach her anymore. So instead, I'll prepare for the worst." "Your father was heartbroken," Martin said quietly. "But he was also strategic. He understood that if he confronted your daughter directly, she would simply report back to her husband, and her husband would move faster, take more risks, possibly expose himself. So instead," I said slowly, "he prepared." "He prepared everything," Martin confirmed. "He documented every attempt. He saved every piece of evidence. He created a complete record of 15 years of attempted fraud, and he left it all for you." Martin looked directly at me, and in his eyes I saw something that looked like grief. "Your father understood something else too," Martin said. "He understood that you were the only person in his family he could trust. Not because you were perfect, but because you hadn't been compromised. You hadn't been manipulated. You hadn't been slowly turned into someone you weren't." He closed the folder carefully and slid it across the desk toward me. "When your father came to me in 2020 and updated these documents," Martin said, "he knew he didn't have much time left. His health was declining. He was losing energy. So he made me promise something. He made me promise that when the time came, when you received the passbook and the chessbook and all the evidence, you would understand that this wasn't about punishment. What was it about? I asked. It was about protection, Martin said. Protection of what your father had built. Protection of your family's legacy. Protection of your daughter, even though she doesn't realize she needs protecting. And protection of the truth. Martin stood up and walked to the window. His office looked out onto a quiet street, the kind of street where nothing remarkable ever happened, even though remarkable things were being discussed inside. Your father knew that his daughter had made choices that would have consequences, Martin said. But he also knew that those consequences didn't have to be the end of her story. If you were willing to help her understand what was happening, to help her see her husband for who he really was, Martin turned back to face me, then maybe there could be redemption instead of just destruction. He paused, letting that sink in. "No, but that's a choice you'll have to make," Martin said. "Your father couldn't make it for you. He could only prepare the evidence. He could only show you the truth. The rest is up to you." I picked up the folder. It was heavier than it looked. Heavier with 15 years of accumulated betrayal documented in meticulous detail. To Norton, I said, "Why would he leave all this for me? Why not just go to the police? Why not just cut her out of his life?" Martin returned to his desk and looked at me over the top of his wire-rimmed glasses. "Because," he said quietly, "your father never stopped loving his daughter. Even when she was stealing from him. Even when she was lying to him. Even when she was choosing her husband over her family. Edward Mitchell never stopped believing that somewhere inside Vivian, the girl he'd raised, was still there." He leaned forward, and he had faith that you would understand that you would know the difference between justice and mercy. Martin reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a sealed envelope. It was old, yellowed with age, addressed in careful handwriting. "To James. Open when the time is right." "This is from your father," Martin said. "He wrote it 5 years ago before his health really started to decline. He told me that when you came to see me, I should give this to you. He said you would know when the time was right to open it." I took the envelope. My father's handwriting, my father's words. My father's final message waiting for me to be ready to hear it. "Your father said something to me the last time I saw him," Martin said. He said, "Martin, I've prepared everything. I've documented everything. I've left everything for James. But the most important thing I'm leaving him is the truth, and the choice about what to do with it." Martin looked directly at me. "Your father knew this moment would come. He prepared for it. He trusted you with it. And now you have to decide what kind of man you're going to be." I didn't open the letter immediately. I sat in Martin's office for a long time, just holding the envelope. My father's handwriting was there on the front in blue ink, "To James. For your eyes only." Martin stepped out to give me privacy. Finally, I opened it. My father's handwriting filled 3 pages, looser, more personal than the careful penmanship of an accountant. The handwriting of a father. "James, if you're reading this, then I'm gone. And you've already found the passbook. I knew Vivian would throw away the chessbook. I knew it the moment I decided to hide the passbook inside it. I've watched my daughter for 15 years, James. I've watched the man she married slowly remake her into someone I barely recognize. And I knew that when the time came, she would do exactly what he told her to do. I couldn't go to the authorities myself. 3 months ago, Vincent started spreading rumors. He told people I was becoming confused, losing my memory. He was laying the groundwork to have me declared incompetent. If I had gone to the police with my suspicions, Vincent would have used that against me. He would have said I was a confused old man making wild accusations. So instead, I prepared for you. Over the past 15 years, Vivian and Vincent have stolen from me over $1.8 million. Some through forged power of attorney documents. Some through fraudulent withdrawals. Some through transfers that looked legitimate on the surface but were anything but. The largest single attempt was in 2015, when they tried to withdraw $2.1 million using forged documents. The bank caught it, but they didn't stop trying. What I'm about to tell you, very few people know. When you were 17, your daughter made a mistake. She thought no one was watching. In 2002, a man named Robert Harrison, my closest friend from my accounting days, passed away. His daughter was the executor of his estate. 2 weeks later, $200,000 disappeared from his account. I didn't have proof at the time, but I knew. I recognized the pattern of the withdrawals. I recognized the forged paperwork. And I knew because your daughter had suddenly started spending money in ways she'd never spent before. I never confronted her about it. I just watched. And I waited. Because I understood something important. Your daughter wasn't acting alone. Vincent Bradford entered Vivian's life in 2012. Within 2 years, he'd married her. Within 2 years of that, he'd convinced her that stealing from me was not only acceptable but necessary. He'd convinced her that I owed her something. He'd convinced her that taking what wasn't hers was justified. And she believed him. That's what I need you to understand, James. Vivian is not the mastermind here. She's the instrument. She's the tool that Vincent has learned to use with precision. Over 15 years, Vincent has systematically stolen my money while keeping my daughter in a state of psychological dependency. He's isolated her from the people who love her. He's made her believe that his ambitions are her ambitions. He's made her believe that loyalty to him matters more than loyalty to family. I believe he's done this before, not just to me, but to other people. This is not his first time. But here's where I need you to listen carefully, James. When you expose this, when you bring this evidence forward, when you watch Vivian face the consequences, remember something. She is also a victim. I know that sounds like a contradiction, but you must hold both truths at the same time. Vivian made choices. Vivian participated in crimes. Vivian signed false documents. But she did all of this under the influence of a man who has spent 13 years systematically dismantling her ability to think for herself. So when you win, and I believe you will remember that winning means more than just seeing the guilty punished. Winning means giving your daughter a chance to understand what happened to her. Winning means helping her see the truth about the man she married. Winning means offering her a path back to herself. That is true justice, James. I love you. I've always been proud of you. And I've always known that you were the only person in this family who could handle what I'm leaving you. Do what's right, Dad. I sat in silence for a long time. The room felt smaller. The air felt heavier. I read the letter again from the beginning, noticing things I'd missed. The way my father had written about Vivian, not with anger, but with sadness. The way he'd written about Vincent with clinical precision, like an accountant observing a problem he'd been studying for years. My father had known. All along he'd known. He'd known about the 2002 incident with Robert Harrison's estate. He'd known about Vivian's transformation. He'd known about Vincent's pattern, his manipulation, his slow poisoning of my daughter's mind. And he'd documented everything, but he'd also left something else. A question I would have to answer myself. Justice or mercy, punishment or redemption. My father had prepared the evidence, but he'd deliberately left the final decision to me. And sitting there holding my father's last words, I understood something I'd never fully understood before. He wasn't just a man trying to protect his money. He was a father trying to save his daughter. Even if it meant destroying the man she'd married, even if it meant that mercy and truth would have to exist in the same moment. I folded the letter carefully. "Martin," I called out. He appeared in the doorway as if he'd been waiting just outside. "I'm ready," I said. "Tell me everything. I want to know exactly what I'm working with." Martin nodded. "Your father said you would be. He said that when you finished reading his letter, you'd be ready to do what needs to be done." He returned to his desk and opened the thick manila folder. "Then let's begin," he said. "Let me show you the evidence your father spent 15 years collecting." After the arrests, the full scope of the fraud became clear. Martin had prepared a detailed breakdown of how the money had moved, where it had gone, and how it had been disguised. Dr. Garrett Holdings, LLC Cons. Martin said, opening a folder filled with corporate documents. Established in 2012, registered in Delaware. The business was ostensibly a consulting firm. Ostensibly, I asked. It did nothing, Martin said simply. No actual consulting work ever occurred. The company existed for one purpose: to launder money stolen from your father. Martin showed me the corporate structure. Vincent Bradford was listed as the registered agent and principal owner. My daughter Vivian's name appeared on none of the official documents, though her signature forged by Vincent appeared on many of the financial authorizations. Here's how it worked, Martin explained. He laid out a series of documents showing the money flow. Your daughter would access accounts using forged power of attorney documents, Martin said. She would withdraw funds and funnel them into Garrett Holdings' accounts. From 2010 to 2015, the stolen amounts escalated steadily, starting at $50,000 and reaching $280,000 annually. Martin continued. The amounts increased each year, disguised through fake invoices for consulting services, management fees, and professional development that never actually occurred. He showed me examples of these invoices. They were professionally formatted, complete with company letterhead invoice numbers and detailed descriptions of services rendered. These invoices justified wire transfers from Garrett Holdings to various shell accounts, Martin explained. From there, the money moved again to offshore accounts, to investment accounts, to property purchases made in your daughter's and your son-in-law's names. Between 2015 and 2024, the pattern continued and accelerated, Martin said, pulling out a summary document. The annual amounts fluctuated between $175,000 and $305,000. Some years higher, some lower, but the total reached approximately $1.8 million over the 15-year period. But the thefts didn't begin in 2010. Martin continued quietly. Your father documented evidence suggesting this pattern extends much further back. In 2002, a man named Robert Harrison, your father's colleague, died. $200,000 disappeared from his estate. Your father believed your daughter was involved. Martin opened another file. Like your father collected documentation over the years, Martin said. Signatures, bank statements, unusual transactions. When your daughter married Vincent Bradford in 2010, your father understood what would happen. The thefts would become systematic, organized, professional. So your father prepared, Martin said. He documented everything. He collected evidence with the precision of an accountant. He created a case so thorough that prosecution became inevitable. The sophistication of your son-in-law's operation is remarkable, Martin continued. He understood exactly how to make stolen money appear legitimate. He knew what documentation financial institutions require. He knew how to create paperwork that would pass audits. 217 forged documents have been identified and authenticated, Martin said. Fake invoices, fraudulent wire authorizations, fabricated contracts, all bearing either forged signatures or signatures from your daughter that Vincent likely coerced or instructed her to sign. The money laundering structure was designed to benefit both your daughter and your son-in-law, Martin said. But the evidence makes clear who controlled the operation. Your son-in-law orchestrated everything. Your daughter was the instrument through which the fraudulent transactions occurred. Your daughter signed documents she may not have fully understood, Martin said. She authorized transfers without comprehending their purpose. She allowed her name and accounts to be used for purposes she may not have grasped. But understanding didn't excuse the crime. Martin continued. Your daughter participated in systematic theft. She benefited from stolen money. She lived a lifestyle funded entirely by money taken from your father. The evidence is undeniable, Martin said. Corporate records, fake invoices, money trails, forged signatures, offshore accounts, all point to deliberate organized conspiracy. Your daughter and your son-in-law will face federal charges for money laundering, elder financial abuse, conspiracy, wire fraud, and document forgery, Martin said. Given your father's evidence, conviction is virtually certain. I sat in silence, absorbing the scope of what my daughter and her husband had done. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a lapse in judgment. It was a systematic, premeditated plan executed over more than 2 decades to steal from people they knew and loved. And my daughter had willingly participated. If you're still here, comment the number 1 so I know you're with me. And tell me this, if you discovered your own child had been stealing from family for years, would you expose the truth? Or stay silent to protect what's left of your family? One quick note before we go on. The next part of this story includes dramatized elements for clarity and impact. If you'd rather not continue, you can stop watching here. Martin pulled out another folder from the thick stack. This one was older, the edges worn and yellowed. He opened it slowly. There's more, Martin said quietly. Something your father documented over many years. Something that changes how we understand your daughter. He laid out documents on the desk. Bank statements, investigators' reports, photographs of forged documents, all from 2002. In 2002, an old friend of your father's passed away, Martin began. His name was Robert Harrison. He was an accountant like your father. They'd worked together for years. When Robert died, he left behind an estate worth approximately $800,000. Martin pointed to a bank statement. Chaktitya, 2 weeks after Robert Harrison's funeral, $200,000 disappeared from his estate account. Robert's daughter hired a private investigator. He found evidence of forged power of attorney documents similar to the ones we see in your father's accounts. He found fraudulent withdrawals. He found signatures that didn't match. But the evidence wasn't conclusive enough for prosecution. Martin continued. Without clear proof, the police wouldn't act. Eventually, the matter was dropped. Martin closed the investigator's report and looked directly at me. But your father never forgot, Martin said. Your father recognized the pattern of the forged documents. Your father understood with absolute certainty that his daughter was involved. Martin opened a letter in Edward's handwriting, dated 2002. I know what Vivian did. I can see it in the forged documents. I can see it in the pattern of the withdrawals. My daughter is a thief. Your father wrote that 23 years ago, Martin said. He was certain then, and he remained certain for 2 decades. He pulled out more documents notes from Edward dated throughout the 2000s. Observations, suspicions, evidence collected over years. Your father watched your daughter carefully. Martin continued. He documented incidents. He kept records of conversations where your daughter mentioned money problems, then suddenly had money. He was building a case, and then in 2010 something changed. Martin opened a new folder labeled 2010. In 2010, your daughter married Vincent Bradford. Your father's observations intensified. He understood something crucial. Your daughter had found a partner who could turn her natural inclinations toward theft into something systematic, something organized. From that moment on, Martin said, your father's preparation became deliberate, strategic. He created new accounts. He ensured your daughter had no direct access to his main assets, but he left just enough opportunity for her to show her hand. He left just enough access for her to reveal who she really was. Martin pulled out a handwritten note from Edward dated 2010. My Vivian has married Vincent Bradford. I understand now what will happen. I will prepare. I will document everything. I will wait. And when the time comes, James will understand. James will know the truth about his daughter. And James will have to decide what that truth means. I sat in silence, reading my father's words. Your father knew, Martin said quietly. For 23 years, your father knew. He knew his daughter was a thief. He knew she treated theft as a profession. He knew she had done it before and would do it again. Your father didn't act rashly in 2002, Martin continued. He didn't confront your daughter. He didn't go to the authorities with suspicions. Instead, he observed. He documented. He understood that your daughter was not acting alone, that she was being influenced by someone else, someone with experience, someone with a plan. And he understood that the only way to protect himself and eventually to help his daughter was to prepare for the moment when everything would be revealed. Martin gathered the documents and placed them back in the folder. Your father has given you something very valuable, Mr. Mitchell, Martin said. He's given you the truth, not just about your daughter's crimes, but about your daughter herself, about who she has become. Your father knew her, James, truly knew her. Not the version she presents to the world, but the woman underneath. The woman who steals from the dead. The woman who exploits the vulnerable. The woman who has built a life around deception. And your father believed that you and only you could handle that truth. He believed that you could see your daughter for who she really is, not with hatred, not with judgment, but with clarity, with understanding. Your father prepared all of this, Martin said, gesturing to the folders, because he knew this moment would come. He knew that eventually you would have to choose. Not between your daughter and the law, but between truth and denial, between mercy and justice. So now you know, Martin said. Now you understand. Your daughter didn't stumble into crime. She didn't make a mistake. She made a choice she's been making for more than 2 decades. The question now is, what choice will you make? I looked at the folders on the desk, 15 years of my father's documentation, 23 years of my daughter's patterns, all of it pointing to a single, inescapable truth. My daughter was a criminal, not because of circumstances, not because of bad luck, but because it was who she had become. And I had to decide what to do with that knowledge. I didn't hesitate. I left Martin's office with the folder of evidence and drove directly to the police station. It was exactly what I expected, institutional, efficient, filled with the quiet hum of law enforcement. I asked for Detective Helena Cross. She appeared 10 minutes later, a woman in her mid-40s with dark hair pulled back in a practical bun, and the posture of someone who'd spent 15 years taking statements from people in crisis. She extended her hand. With Mr. Mitchell, Martin Ashford called me. He said you'd be coming. Of course, Martin had prepared for this too. Helena led me to a small interview room and closed the door. Tell me everything, she said. So I did. I told her about the Passbook, Adrian Blackwood at the bank, Martin's office, my father's 23 years of documentation. I told her about Garrett Holdings, the forged documents, the systematic theft, spanning 15 years. Helena didn't interrupt. Her expression grew more serious with every detail. This is elder financial abuse, she said finally. One of the most common crimes we see. Usually it's hidden. Usually there's almost no evidence. She gestured to the folder. But this is organized, calculated. The kind of case that comes along maybe once in a decade. Your father understood the law. Helena continued. He documented everything with precision. He authenticated signatures. He created a paper trail that will be extremely difficult to refute. Is there more? She asked. At the bank, I said. Adrian has records of the 2015 attempt forged documents forensic analysis. Good. What about Garrett Holdings? All here, I said. Tax documents, fake invoices, everything. Helena looked up. Mr. Mitchell, what you're describing isn't just elder financial abuse. This involves money laundering. This is federal. We'll need to coordinate with the FBI. What happens now? I asked. I review all this evidence. I present it to a judge. I request warrants for both your daughter and your brother-in-law. Once signed, we make arrests. She leaned forward. But this takes time. We can't rush. If we move too fast without everything perfect, they could walk. A good defense attorney could claim rights violations. How long? I asked. Could be 2 weeks, could be 2 months. Helena closed the folder. During that time, you cannot tell anyone. Not your daughter, not your brother-in-law. No one. So one wrong move, they destroy evidence. They flee. They warn each other. We lose our window. You need to act normal, she said firmly. Go about your life as if nothing has changed. If they call, keep it brief. Don't give them reason to think anything's different. She stood. I'm taking this folder. My team will verify every document. We'll coordinate with FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. We'll present everything to a judge. When everything is perfect, we make arrests. Both of them, I asked. At the same time, if both of them, Helena confirmed. Simultaneous different locations if possible. No chance to coordinate or destroy anything. She paused at the door. Your father was remarkable. I've been a detective 15 years. I've never seen someone prepare a case this thoroughly. Your father created evidence that will put your daughter and brother-in-law in prison. She looked directly at me. Are you prepared for that? I thought about my father's letter. I thought about his words about mercy and justice existing in the same moment. I thought about my daughter somewhere in Austin, completely unaware that the world was closing in. I am, I said. Good, Helena said. The hardest part isn't the investigation, it's the waiting, knowing the truth and not being able to act on it, watching your daughter's life continue while you hold the proof that will destroy it. She opened the door. Go home, Mr. Mitchell. Act normal. Let me do my job. I left the police station in a daze, driving back toward Austin. 2 weeks, 2 months. I didn't know how long, but somewhere in the machinery of law enforcement pieces were being set in motion. Warrants would be requested, evidence verified, and at some point Detective Helena Cross would walk into my daughter's life with handcuffs and a warrant. The hardest part, Helena had said, was the waiting. She was right. My father hadn't just left me evidence. He'd left me a burden. The knowledge that my daughter was a criminal. The power to destroy her. And now I had to live with both, while pretending nothing had changed. I had to act normal while my world fell apart. I had to keep a secret that would reshape my family forever. I had to wait for justice to arrive and accept that when it did, there would be no going back. The call came at 7:15 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, exactly 2 weeks after I'd walked out of the police station. It's done, Helena said simply. Both arrests made simultaneously. You should hear about it on the news within the hour. I didn't turn on the news. Instead, I sat in my apartment and tried to process what was happening in real time. Helena had called me back that afternoon with details. Vivian had been arrested at 6:45 a.m. at her home. Helena described how the officers had knocked on the door while she was still asleep. When my daughter opened it, she was still wearing pajamas, her hair disheveled, her face confused and terrified. She thought it was a delivery or a neighbor, Helena told me. When she saw the uniforms, she panicked immediately. Helena had read Vivian her rights, while she stood in her living room in shock. My daughter had kept saying the same thing over and over. This is a mistake. There's been some confusion. I didn't do anything wrong. But the officers had been professional and efficient. They'd cuffed her, placed her in the back of a patrol car, and driven her to the police station. She kept insisting it was a mistake the entire ride, Helena said. She kept asking what this was about, kept demanding to know why this was happening. Vincent's arrest had been different, Helena explained. He'd been arrested at his office at 6:47 a.m., just 2 minutes after my daughter caught in the middle of preparing for a morning meeting. His colleagues were in the conference room when the police arrived. They'd all watched as Helena placed him under arrest, read him his rights, and cuffed him in front of everyone. He didn't panic like your daughter, Helena told me. He remained calm, almost cold. His only words were a single command: call my lawyer. Nothing else. No denial. No protest. Just that one instruction delivered with the precision of someone who understood exactly what was happening and had already calculated his next move. That coldness told me everything I needed to know about Vincent Bradford, Helena said. While your daughter was falling apart, terrified and confused, he was already thinking about legal strategy. He wasn't concerned about your daughter. He was only concerned about himself. Over the next several hours, Helena sent me updates via text and phone calls. Vivian had been processed and placed in an interrogation room. Vincent had been processed and immediately requested a lawyer. Both had been read their rights. Both had been informed of the charges: federal money laundering, elder financial abuse, conspiracy, wire fraud, document forgery. When the evidence was presented to them, Helena told me my daughter had broken down completely. She was shown the documents, Helena explained. The forged power of attorney letters, the fake invoices, the bank statements showing the money transfers. She was shown the forensic analysis of the signatures, the authentication reports from the bank's document examiners, and she finally stopped insisting it was a mistake. Helena quoted my daughter. I didn't know. I didn't understand what he was making me do. Vincent told me it was all legal. He said it was our inheritance. He said it was ours to take. But her protests fell on deaf ears, Helena said. The evidence was irrefutable. 200 forged documents. Forensic signatures authenticated beyond question. Bank records showing every transfer, every fake invoice, every shell company transaction. Vincent said nothing throughout his interrogation. He sat across from the table with his lawyer beside him and refused to answer any questions. But the evidence didn't need his cooperation, Helena told me. The evidence spoke for itself. I sat in my apartment that evening watching the local news report the story. Local couple arrested in connection with elder financial abuse case, the headline read. The reporter mentioned the forged documents, the shell company, the systematic theft over 15 years. They didn't mention my name. They didn't mention my father, Edward. The story was presented as a law enforcement success. Detective Helena Cross and her team had investigated a complex financial crime and secured arrests. But I knew the truth. My father had done the investigating. My father had collected the evidence. My father had orchestrated everything from beyond the grave, using me as his instrument to deliver justice. Helena called me again that evening. How are you holding up? She asked. I don't know, I said honestly. I know it was the right thing to do, but it still feels like I destroyed my family. The evidence is irrefutable, Mr. Mitchell, Helena said gently. I've been doing this for 15 years. I've never seen a case this well documented. They're going to face serious charges. And your daughter will likely cooperate with prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence. After I hung up, I sat alone with my thoughts. My daughter Vivian was in custody. My son-in-law Vincent was facing federal charges. My father's evidence had been validated by law enforcement and would soon be presented in court. Justice was in motion. But as I thought about my daughter sitting in an interrogation room, confused and terrified, I found myself thinking about my father's letter. I found myself remembering his words. What you do with mercy, that is your choice now. The evidence against my daughter was irrefutable, but so was the reality that she'd been manipulated and used by a man who'd learned to exploit her vulnerabilities over 13 years of marriage. There was no going back from this. I sat in the observation room with Helena separated from Vivian by a two-way mirror. My daughter looked smaller than I remembered, smaller and terrified. She wore the same clothes from her arrest pajamas, a hastily thrown-on cardigan. Her hair was uncombed. She kept touching her face like she couldn't believe this was real. "Your father prepared you for this," Helena said quietly beside me. "Are you ready?" I nodded, though I wasn't sure I was. Detective Morrison entered the interrogation room with a manila folder. Vivian's eyes went to it immediately, fear flickering across her face. She'd asked for a lawyer, but she was talking anyway. That was Vincent's influence. He'd always told her to deny everything to stay calm. But Vivian had never been good at staying calm under pressure. "Ms. Mitchell." Morrison began opening the folder. "I want to go over your statement. You said your father authorized you to manage his finances. Is that correct?" "Yes," Vivian said. Her voice was hoarse. He asked me to help. He trusted me." Morrison pulled out a document. "This is a medical evaluation from Dr. Patricia Johnson, dated March 2014. It states that your father suffered a severe stroke in February 2014 and was bedridden for 8 months. He couldn't walk. He couldn't write clearly. According to the nurse's notes, he could barely speak without slurring." Vivian's face went pale. "How did he authorize you to manage his accounts if he was bedridden and unable to sign documents?" He must have, before the stroke." Morrison placed another document on the table. "This is a power of attorney dated April 2015, 1 year after the stroke, after Dr. Johnson's medical evaluation, after the nursing records show your father was still recovering." He leaned forward. "Did your father sign this?" "Yes." "Are you sure? Because we had a forensic handwriting expert examine it. The signature doesn't match any authenticated samples from your father. It matches your signature, Ms. Mitchell, with alterations." Vivian's hands started shaking. She looked away from the mirror as if she could feel me watching. "I want my lawyer," she said, but it was too late. The evidence was already in the room. 2 hours later, Vincent sat in the adjacent interrogation room, and I moved to watch him instead. Vincent was composed. That was the most chilling part. No panic, no denial, just a thin smile and practiced calm. "Mr. Bradford," Detective Morrison said, "we've been reviewing Garrett Holdings, LLC, the shell company established in 2012. According to the corporate documents, you were the registered agent, the signing authority. Every major transaction from 2012 to 2024 has your signature." I don't recall every document I've signed," Vincent said smoothly. "My wife handled the day-to-day operations." "Your wife, the woman who was bedridden at the time these documents were created." Vincent's smile didn't waver. "I was unaware of the source of the funds. My wife may have made decisions without my knowledge. It was a lie so practiced, so rehearsed, that I realized he'd been planning this moment for years." Blame Vivian. Claim ignorance. Let the jury see a woman who was manipulated and a man who was merely her dupe. But Morrison had prepared for this. "We've traced every wire transfer from Garrett Holdings," Morrison said. "Everyone requires dual authorization. Your signature appears on 187 transfer documents, all authenticated, all verified against your known handwriting samples from your corporate tax filings, your driver's license, your business correspondence." Vincent's jaw tightened slightly. "The only tell." "Furthermore, Mr. Bradford, we've recovered emails from your personal account. Emails you deleted, but our cyber forensics team recovered them. In these emails, you discuss the long game with regard to the Mitchell estate. You discuss your wife as, and I'm quoting here, a useful asset. These emails date back to 2011, 3 years after you married her. 3 years into a marriage you told people was based on love." Vincent looked directly at the mirror then. For a moment I thought he could see me. I thought he knew I was watching his world collapse. "I want my lawyer," he said. Helena turned to me as the detectives escorted both of them out of the interrogation rooms. She didn't speak for a long time. "The evidence is irrefutable," she finally said. "Medical records, forensic analysis, digital forensics, 15 years of transaction history. Your father left nothing to chance, Mr. Mitchell." I watched Vivian being led down the hallway in handcuffs. She looked back once, and for a moment our eyes met through the observation window. She didn't know I was there. She just saw her reflection, a woman who'd been caught. A woman who'd been used, a woman whose husband had prepared to sacrifice her the moment the walls started closing in. Vincent was already gone, escorted to a different holding area. No backward glance, no moment of doubt. "What happens now?" I asked Helena. "Now we build the prosecution," she said. "We have everything we need. Both of them will be charged with federal money laundering, elder financial abuse conspiracy, and document forgery. The sentencing guidelines are substantial." I nodded slowly. Justice felt cold in that moment. Necessary, but cold. Edward had known this would happen. He'd orchestrated it all, every document, every safeguard, every carefully planted piece of evidence leading to this exact room, this exact mirror, this exact moment. And I was the instrument of his final will. The evidence couldn't be denied. But neither could the cost of exposing it. 3 days before the trial began, I couldn't sleep. I'd read Edward's letter so many times that I'd memorized passages. His handwriting had become as familiar to me as my own thoughts. I traced the words with my finger. "I have prepared everything, James. You will understand when the time comes." He had. I did. And now understanding felt like a weight I wasn't sure I could carry into that courtroom. Helena called me that morning. Her voice was steady, professional, but I could hear something underneath it, conviction. "We're ready," she said. "All the witnesses are confirmed. Adrian Blackwood from First Regional Savings will testify about the 2015 attempted fraud and the account activity. Dr. Patricia Johnson will confirm your father's medical condition. In 2014 and 2015, he was not incapacitated mentally, only physically. We have 3 additional physicians who will testify to his mental clarity even after the stroke." I sat on the edge of my bed, phone pressed to my ear, listening to the machinery of justice being put into motion. "The forensic handwriting expert will present the signature analysis," Helena continued. "The digital forensics team will present the recovered emails from Vincent's account. The bank records span 15 years, every transaction, every transfer, every dollar accounted for. We have Garrett Holdings' corporate documents, with Vincent's authenticated signatures on 187 transfer authorizations." "And the shell company records?" I asked. "All of it. Formation documents, tax filings, fake invoices, vendor payments that trace back to offshore accounts. It's a textbook money laundering operation. Federal prosecutors are confident we have enough for conviction on all counts." I closed my eyes. Edward had done this. Not just the preparation, the precision. Every document, every piece of evidence arranged like a chess match played over 15 years. "What about Vivian?" I asked. The question came out smaller than I intended. Helena was quiet for a moment. "Your daughter is cooperating with prosecutors. Her lawyer advised it. Once she saw the medical records, the forged signatures, the emails where Vincent called her a useful asset, once she understood she was being set up as the fall guy, something broke. She's giving testimony about how Vincent manipulated her, how he forged documents in front of her, how he told her what to sign and what to say. Relief and sadness mixed in my chest. Vivian was guilty. That hadn't changed. But she was also a victim in a way I hadn't fully understood until the evidence made it impossible to deny. Your father knew this would happen, Helena said quietly. He knew Vincent would blame her. He knew Vivian would eventually see the truth. He prepared for that too. After we hung up, I pulled Edward's letter from the drawer where I kept it. I'd moved it from Martin's office to my own home. It felt important to have it close, to keep it safe, to honor the trust Edward had placed in me. I read the closing lines again. "I love you, James. Help her escape that man. That is the real justice." And beneath that, in smaller script, "I have prepared everything, but now it falls to you." That afternoon, I met with the prosecution team, 3 attorneys from the district, and a federal prosecutor specializing in white-collar crime and money laundering. We sat in a conference room surrounded by evidence, boxes of documents, spreadsheets, photographs of bank statements, the chessbook with the passbook still inside, sealed in an evidence bag. "The jury will see a systematic pattern," the lead prosecutor, Susan Reeves, explained. She was in her 50s, sharp-eyed, someone who'd spent decades untangling financial crime. "We start with 2002, the Robert Harrison estate theft. Vivian was just a young woman then, but the pattern was already clear. Then we jump to 2010 when Vincent enters the picture. Suddenly the thefts become organized, professional, systematic. The amounts increase. The shell company is created. Forged documents multiply." She pulled up a timeline on the screen. 15 years compressed into a visual narrative. 2010, $50,000. 2011, $100,000. 2012, $150,000. The numbers climbing year after year, reaching nearly $2 million in total theft. "But your father created a secret account to protect his remaining assets," Reeves continued. "But he also left a trail. He wanted to be found. He wanted this documented." "He wanted justice," I said. "He wanted everything documented." Reeves corrected gently. "Justice would have been going to the police in 2002 or 2010 or 2015. But your father was patient. He was strategic. He waited until he had so much evidence, so many witnesses, so much proof, that conviction would be inevitable." I thought about Edward in his study year after year, recording dates and amounts, collecting documents, building a case, not for revenge, but for the kind of justice that couldn't be questioned, couldn't be appealed, couldn't be denied. The night before the trial, I sat in my living room with Edward's letter in my hands. The envelope was worn now from handling. The paper inside was creased from being folded and refolded. I read it one final time and something shifted inside me. Not certainty exactly, I'd never been certain about any of this. But readiness, a kind of acceptance that Edward had given me not just evidence, but a purpose. "I'm ready." I whispered to the empty room, to the ghost of my father, to the machinery of justice that was about to turn. "I'm ready for this." The chessbook sat on my coffee table, sealed in its evidence bag. Inside the passbook, with the account number 774122289 and a balance of $2,875,600, the truth that had started everything, the secret Edward had kept for 15 years, the final move in a game that had been played since before. I fully understood the rules. Tomorrow the trial would begin. Tomorrow a jury would see the evidence and make their judgment. Tomorrow the truth would stand in open court, irrefutable and undeniable. But tonight, I sat in the silence of my home holding my father's letter and felt the weight of what was about to happen settle on my shoulders. Everything would change when I walked into that courtroom. Everything Edward had prepared for would finally be unleashed. The federal courtroom was cold and sterile. December sunlight filtered through high windows, casting long shadows across the polished wood. I sat in the gallery, my hands folded in my lap, trying not to shake. Susan Reeves, the lead prosecutor, stood and began her presentation. Her voice was measured, methodical. She walked the jury through 15 years of theft, document by document, transaction by transaction. "Garrett Holdings, LLC," she said, projecting the company formation papers on the screen. "Incorporated in 2012, registered agent Vincent Bradford, Purpose listed as consulting services. But as you will see, no legitimate consulting ever occurred. She clicked through invoice after invoice. Fake vendor payments, offshore wire transfers, money flowing like water through a broken dam. Then Adrian Blackwood took the stand. Adrian wore a dark suit, his banker's composure intact. But even he seemed shaken by the scope of what he was describing. In 2015, we flagged a suspicious power of attorney, Adrian testified. Someone attempted to withdraw $2.1 million from account 774-12289. The signature didn't match our authenticated samples. We blocked the transaction immediately. We documented everything and waited for Mr. Mitchell to contact us. "Did he contact you?" Reeves asked. "Not directly, but we kept the account secure. Over the next decade, we noticed ongoing transfers from other accounts, smaller amounts more frequent. Patterns consistent with systematic theft. When this investigation began, we provided all records. The defense attorney, a tired-looking man named Garrison, stood for cross-examination. He tried to suggest the transactions were authorized, that Edward had simply forgotten giving permission, that the medical records might be incomplete. But then Dr. Patricia Johnson took the stand. She was Edward's neurologist. She pulled up his medical imaging, his cognitive assessments, his treatment records, spanning from 2014 to Edward's death in October 2025. Mr. Mitchell experienced a significant stroke in February 2014, Dr. Johnson explained. This affected his motor functions and his speech. However, his cognitive abilities remained entirely intact. In fact, his mental acuity was exceptional. I tested him quarterly. There was no decline in memory, reasoning, or judgment. If anything, he became more focused, more deliberate in his thinking. Garrison asked if it was possible Edward was confused about his finances. "Impossible," Dr. Johnson said flatly. I reviewed his medical files with an emphasis on cognitive function. Mr. Mitchell was not confused. He was methodical. The courtroom fell silent. Then came the forensic handwriting expert. She displayed the forged power of attorney alongside authenticated signatures from Edward's hand. The differences were stark. The forged version had inconsistent pressure, rushed strokes, altered baseline angles. This signature was not written by Edward Mitchell, the expert concluded. Based on comparative analysis, it shares characteristics with Vivian Mitchell's known handwriting, with attempted alterations to obscure that fact. I heard my daughter Vivian make a sound, then a small, strangled cry. Her lawyer placed a hand on her arm, but it was too late. The courtroom had heard her reaction. Vincent, sitting beside her in the defendant's chair, didn't react at all. He stared straight ahead, his face a mask. The prosecution presented the recovered emails from Vincent's account. The jury read his words. "She's a useful asset, long-term investment. When the time comes, she'll be the one blamed." When the jury read that line, my daughter Vivian broke completely. She put her face in her hands. For the first time, I saw her not as my child, but as what she truly was, a woman who'd been manipulated, used, and set up to take the fall for a man who'd orchestrated everything. Vincent still didn't move. The prosecution rested. The defense presented nothing of substance. Garrison's closing argument was perfunctory, almost apologetic. He knew he'd lost before he began. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood. The judge asked for the verdict. On the count of federal money laundering, we find the defendants guilty. On the count of elder financial abuse, we find the defendants guilty. On the count of conspiracy, we find the defendants guilty. On the count of document forgery, we find the defendants guilty. 12 times the word guilty echoed through the courtroom. My daughter Vivian wept. Vincent's face finally cracked a flash of cold fury before he composed himself again. But what made justice truly complete wasn't the verdict itself. It was something else entirely. The courtroom fell silent as the judge prepared to pronounce sentence. But before he spoke, The prosecutor stood once more. Your Honor, Susan Reeves said, the prosecution would like to enter a victim impact statement into the record. A statement written by Edward Mitchell before his death. The judge nodded. Proceed. Reeves opened the sealed envelope carefully and began to read Edward's words aloud. To the court, and to those who will hear this, I am Edward Mitchell. I have been a victim of systematic theft and fraud perpetrated by members of my own family. I will likely not survive to see this case concluded. But I am writing this so that the truth cannot be denied or forgotten. My daughter Vivian was manipulated by Vincent Bradford from the moment they met. He identified her vulnerabilities and exploited them. He taught her that stealing was acceptable. He made her believe we were all complicit in some grand game. But Vivian is not the architect of this crime. She is its instrument. Vincent Bradford is a predator. He has done this before and will do it again if given the chance. I have spent 15 years documenting what he has done. Not for revenge, but because justice requires evidence and truth requires a witness. I ask this court to understand that while my daughter committed crimes, she did so under the influence of a man who systematically manipulated her. I ask for mercy for Vivian balanced with justice for her actions, but I ask for accountability for Vincent Bradford. His predatory behavior must be met with significant consequences. He orchestrated this conspiracy. He forged documents. He laundered money. He exploited his wife. He stole from me and from others. I trust this court to render justice that reflects both truth and compassion. Edward Mitchell. Reeves finished reading. The courtroom was absolutely silent. The judge removed his glasses. Even the court reporter seemed moved. Vincent's face remained carved from stone. But Vivian wept quietly, her shoulders shaking. The judge called for order and prepared to pronounce sentence. Vincent Bradford. The judge began his voice grave. You have been found guilty on 4 counts of federal crimes. You orchestrated a systematic theft spanning 15 years. You manipulated a vulnerable woman. You forged documents with sophistication and premeditation. You laundered money through shell companies. You preyed upon an elderly man's trust and kindness. The court recognizes the severity of your actions and the calculated nature of your crimes. The judge continued. You are sentenced to 12 years in federal prison, to be followed by 5 years of supervised release. You are ordered to make full restitution in the amount of $2,875,600, plus court costs and fines, totaling $500,000. Vincent's jaw tightened, the only sign of emotion he permitted himself. He nodded slightly, as if accepting the verdict as merely an inconvenience. Vivian Mitchell. The judge continued, his tone noticeably softer. You have been found guilty on 4 counts. However, the court recognizes several mitigating factors in your case. You were manipulated by your husband from the beginning of your marriage. You have cooperated fully with prosecutors. You have expressed remorse for your actions. While cooperation and remorse do not erase your crimes, they are significant factors in determining an appropriate sentence, the judge said. You forged documents. You participated in theft. You violated your father's trust. These are serious crimes that demand serious consequences. However, the evidence presented suggests that you were not the architect of this conspiracy. You were an instrument in another man's plan, the judge said. Taking that into account, the court sentences you to 4 years in federal prison, to be followed by 3 years of supervised release. You are ordered to make full restitution in the amount of $2,875,600, plus court costs and fines totaling $200,000. My daughter Vivian collapsed into her chair. Her lawyer held her shoulder as she wept, not with the shock of conviction, but with the weight of finally understanding what she'd done, what she'd become, what could never be taken back. I watched my son-in-law maintain his composure as he was led from the courtroom. He showed no remorse, no regret, no sign that he had learned anything from this process. He was already calculating his next move, his next appeal, his next strategy. I watched my daughter break beneath the weight of truth and consequence. Justice had been served, but my family lay shattered in the wreckage of that justice. The evidence was irrefutable. The sentence was deserved. My father's voice, delivered through his final letter, had shaped how this court understood not just the crimes, but the humanity of those involved. My father had known that justice required both accountability and compassion. He had asked this court to punish Vincent's predatory behavior while recognizing Vivian's victimization, and the court had listened. 1 week after the verdict, I sat in my office and received the check. 2,875,566 dollari. The restitution amount from my daughter Vivian's seized assets, plus the additional damages awarded by the court. The money my father Edward had accumulated over 15 years, the money my daughter Vivian and her husband Vincent had stolen, now returned to me with the weight of irony behind every digit. I stared at the number for a long time. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like an invoice for everything I'd lost. Vivian was transferred to federal prison camp Alderson in West Virginia, a minimum security facility which was a small mercy. Vincent went to a federal penitentiary in Kentucky, a much harsher place. I wondered if he regretted anything in those first moments of incarceration. Knowing Vincent, I doubted it. The news coverage faded after 2 weeks. A local story about elder financial abuse and money laundering, tragic, but not unusual enough to maintain public interest. By November, most people had forgotten about the Mitchell family entirely. But I couldn't forget. 3 months after Vivian's arrival at Alderson, I received a letter. It bore her handwriting on the envelope, careful and small, as if she was trying to make herself invisible. I opened it. "Oh, James Howm," it began. "I don't know if you'll read this. I don't deserve for you to read this, but I need to try." She described her first days in prison. The shock of the routine, the loss of privacy, the reality of what she'd done finally settling on her shoulders without the fog of denial to cushion the fall. "I want you to know that I didn't understand what was happening," she wrote. "Vincent told me everything was normal, that Father would approve, that we were just managing family assets. I believed him because I wanted to believe him, because it was easier than seeing what he really was." She wrote about her marriage, how Vincent had isolated her from Edward, from me, how he'd told her she wasn't smart enough to question his decisions, how he'd made her feel worthless so she'd be grateful for his attention. "I know that doesn't excuse what I did. I know I stole from Father. I know I hurt you. I know I hurt myself. But I want you to know that I see it now. I see all of it." The letter ended with a simple plea. "I'm sorry, James. I'm truly sorry." I read it twice. Then I put it in a drawer and never responded. Not because I didn't believe her. I think I did. But because some damage once done cannot be repaired by apology alone. My daughter Vivian had to live with that knowledge now that her contrition, however genuine, would never be enough to restore what was broken. Over the following months, more letters came. Some were longer, filled with details about her life in prison, her work assignment in the library, the other inmates she'd befriended. Some were shorter, just a few lines expressing how much she missed me, how much she regretted everything. I read each one. I kept them in a box in my study, but I never responded. To respond would mean forgiveness. To respond would mean reopening a door that had been permanently closed. My daughter had made her choices. Now she had to live with them. As did I. I kept Edward's chess book on my desk. The passbook remained sealed inside the evidence bag, but I could see it through the plastic, that small ledger containing 15 years of documented theft, the physical manifestation of my father's vigilance. He'd known. From the beginning, he'd known what my daughter Vivian and her husband Vincent were capable of. And instead of confronting them, he'd prepared. He'd documented. He'd waited. I used to wonder if that was wisdom or cowardice. Now I understood it was both. Edward had given me a choice not explicitly, but through his actions. I could have turned away. I could have protected my daughter, made excuses, kept the family together through silence. But Edward had made that impossible by ensuring the truth could never be hidden. Sometimes I wondered what would have happened if I'd destroyed the passbook. If I'd found it in that trash bin and simply thrown it away. If I'd let my daughter and her husband face no consequences for their crimes. Would my family still be intact? Would Vivian still be my daughter in more than just biological fact? Would Edward's legacy be one of silence and complicity, rather than truth and accountability? I knew the answers to these questions, and they terrified me. Justice had been served. Vivian served her 4-year sentence. Vincent served his 12-year sentence. The money was returned. The crime was exposed. But my family was gone. Edward dead. Vivian in prison. Vincent in prison. My relationship with both of them severed, possibly forever. I was alone in the Austin house where I'd grown up, surrounded by inherited property and blood money returned, and the only sound was the silence of a family that no longer existed. My colleagues at work knew something had happened, but I gave them no details. I told them my father had passed away, that there had been legal complications with his estate, that everything was resolved now. They accepted this explanation without pressing for more information. People in Austin understand that some family matters are not discussed, but I couldn't escape the weight of what I'd done. Every morning I woke up knowing that my daughter was in prison because of the evidence I'd delivered. Every evening I returned to a house that echoed with absence. I tried dating once 6 months after the sentencing, a woman named Patricia whom I'd met through a mutual friend. She was kind and intelligent and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me, but I couldn't open myself to her in the way that intimacy requires. How could I explain my life? How could I tell her that I'd destroyed my family in the name of justice? The relationship ended after 3 months. Patricia said I seemed distant, like I was holding part of myself back. She was right. I was holding back the part of myself that had made these choices, that had pursued this justice that had to live with its consequences. Some nights I took out Edward's letter and read it again. What you do with mercy, that is your choice now. I'd chosen justice over mercy. I'd chosen truth over family. Edward had prepared me to make that choice. But he couldn't prepare me for what it would cost. The chessbook sat on my desk, gathering dust. The passbook remained sealed inside the evidence bag, and I continued living in Austin surrounded by money and absence, justice and regret. Years passed. Vivian was released after serving her 4-year sentence. I learned through mutual acquaintances that she moved to California, that she'd started over, that she was rebuilding her life far away from Austin and everything it represented. I never reached out to her. She never reached out to me. Vincent remained in federal prison with many years still remaining on his 12-year sentence. I never thought about him. Or rather, I tried not to think about him. But I thought about my daughter often. I thought about the letters she'd written to me from prison. I thought about her apologies and her explanations. I thought about whether I could have handled things differently, been more merciful, found a path that didn't destroy everything. But the evidence had been irrefutable. The crime had been systematic. The theft had been real. Justice had been the only possible outcome. And yet, sitting alone in my Austin house, surrounded by money I never wanted and silence I couldn't escape, I wondered if justice had truly been served. The evidence was irrefutable. But so was the cost of truth. I share this story not as a triumph, but as a cautionary tale. Don't be like me. Don't wait until betrayal has consumed 15 years of your life before seeking truth. Don't sacrifice your family on the altar of justice thinking vindication will fill the void. My father taught me through his letters and his evidence that family betrayal cuts deepest when trust is weaponized. He showed me that family betrayal can be systematic, calculated, and disguised as love. He demonstrated that recognizing family betrayal early, truly seeing it, saves you from becoming what I became, a man with money but without family. God knows the cost of my choices. I pray He guides those facing similar storms. God tested my faith when I had to choose between mercy and truth. God's grace reminds us that justice without compassion leaves only emptiness. Through my grandpa stories, Edward's legacy, I learned that grandpa stories carry warnings we must heed. These grandpa stories teach us to protect those we love, not destroy them through exposure. If you recognize yourself in this narrative, please seek help early. Protect yourself, but also consider whether justice worth your family's destruction. Please subscribe and share if this resonated with you. Remember, some stories are dramatized for educational purposes, but the core lessons about detecting financial and emotional abuse are real. If this content doesn't align with your values, please find resources that do.